everybody. This is Dennis Labriola, and I want to welcome you to another installment of Seventh Inning Stretch, the podcast. And this is where we kind of take that pause like we have in the game, right? That seventh inning stretch. We take a pause and we talk about and we look at the relationships that we have. Those relationships that are in our life, maybe in the past, how they impacted us, also how our lives impact other people. And we kind of look at different types of relationships. And today we're going to talk about a type of relationship that, well, for most of us, unfortunately, well, we don't acknowledge very much. But yet we are part of, humanity. And when we're talking about that, talking about our community, well, sometimes we have to think about those things that are really, really important. And this kind of relationship, for me, it was actually a little scary. So with me today is Josiah Haken, and he is the author of Neighbors with No Doors, The Truth About Homelessness and How You and I can make a difference. He's also the CEO of City Relief. That is a nonprofit organization working for and with the homeless in the New York vicinity. So here in New York City, in New Jersey. And we're going to find out a lot about this work and about the work that God has called him really to be. So I want to welcome you to this podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with you and to hang out and to get to share stories together.
I know, it's really cool. I think you and I met, what, 5-6 years ago at a business event.
Time is an illusion. I don't know what day. I think since my first kid was born 12 years ago, I don't know what year anything happened.
Yeah, it's 2024.
Is it 2024?
It is, just so that you know, okay? So I must say that your book really, and this is the book here, all right, Neighbors with No Doors. And I have to tell you that this book really opened my eyes to so many things concerning the homeless. And it made me realize how ignorant I was in that regard. And really to understand my neighbors that don't have any doors.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the good news. You're not alone. I mean, I wrote the book specifically for the average person who sees the guy panhandling, wants to help maybe, but is uncomfortable and doesn't even know how did he get to this point. And that's because that's most of us. So just so you know, like I wrote the book because I know that there's so many people out there who see the homeless around them, want to engage, but don't really know where to start.
And the misconceptions that we have. Yeah. I mean, so many misconceptions. On the way here, Patty and I are walking from the garage, and there was a fella, hey, can you help me out? I reached my hand in because I thought of you. And I said, you know what? I can't just walk by. All right. Because I learned something. I actually learned something. I reached my hand in my pocket, gave him, pretty much emptied that pocket to him. So, and I thought, probably like most of our audience, our homeless are really part of our society that, well, we feel has just failed in life. And maybe for all sorts of reasons, and sometimes we even feel like they're a threat, to us. So my first question: who are our neighbors without doors, really?
Yeah, I mean, our neighbors without doors are really, when I think about it, it's anyone who's going through a crisis. Like, so the rules and the kind of the best practices that I've tried to lay out in my book also apply in every context in terms of just people who are going through a difficult season. So the truth is that right now in our country, there's well over 600,000 people who don't have reliable and a sustainable place to stay.
Yeah.
And so that number is growing. It actually went up 12% in 2022.
Yeah.
And I might have been 2023. Like I said, I'm not good with these years.
Yeah.
But the fact is that the number of people who are falling into homelessness, who are falling into crisis, who don't know how they're going to pay their bills, don't know where they're going to stay,
right?
They're bouncing maybe from couch to couch, or they're going into a shelter, or maybe they're actually choosing to be in the street because they had a bad experience in a shelter.
Yeah.
Whatever the situation may be, the numbers of people that are all around us are staggering.
Yeah.
And they're getting worse by the day.
Well, I did some research on some of the statistics, and you're right. 2023, over 650,000 homeless in the U.S., 93,000 here in New York City, 33,000 of them, 33,000 of them are children. And those are just the ones that slept in the municipal, in the shelters. How many,
Yeah.
how many more out that never go to the shelters?
Yeah, and I won't bore you, the audience, with the specifics of how those counts are done, but they're reliably undercounted.
Yeah.
So the numbers that we see are just a baseline. You can assume, because the nature of homelessness is being transient. Not, I mean, how do they count people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so figuring out how many people are actually going through this kind of experience, it's a mind-numbing reality.
Yeah.
So the numbers are actually much worse.
Yeah.
And like, to your point, the fastest growing subset of the population of homeless folks in America are women and children.
Yeah.
So this is not one of those situations when, I think, when people think about homelessness,
Mm.
I think the pictures that we get in our mind are of the gentleman who's outside the train station with the big beard and the shopping cart, and or the guy rummaging through the trash. And so I think, because of the news, because of social media, we have this picture of homelessness
Right.
that I describe as sort of the iceberg effect.
Yeah.
It's the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And we don't actually picture or see the full iceberg that goes, way underwater and is actually vast and huge. Those are the people that are choosing to not be seen.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is we see the tip and we're like, oh, that must be the whole thing. And it's not.
No, it's
not
not.
even close.
I was surprised to learn that, according to the Department of, I don't know, Housing or whoever it is, one of those departments, right? That the number one reason, though, is affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing. I always think of, somebody down in their luck, they lost their job, maybe they got a challenge with drugs, or they got or criminals, or, you have these visions that we have, and they're inaccurate.
Well,
not that they're not part of it.
Exactly. And that's my point, is they are part of it, but it's not the whole picture.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I started writing this book, I'll tell you, I actually wrote about 150 pages. And as an author, you totally understand this process, right? Where you write, and then you write, and you write, and then you read what you write. And I reached a point where I was like, okay, I somehow missed my exit.
Yeah.
And I ended up writing all these pages that didn't fit.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, where do I go from here? And so I started having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he said, Josiah, stop trying to write the book that you want people to read, and start writing the book that people need to read.
Yeah.
And that shifted something in my brain, where I said, what if this was my only contribution? If this book is sort of, if I get one shot at this, because not everybody writes a book.
No,
very few people.
Very
actually.
few. Yeah.
The vast majority of people who want to write a book don't, because it's hard.
Yeah, it is.
So
I wrote short stories because it's a lot easier.
It's hard. It's a hard process. So the dynamic of saying, what do people need to read? And that's where I came across this idea of stigma and misunderstanding, like you said. And so I thought, what are the 4 primary stigmas or stereotypes that we have about homeless people? And I came up with the fact that they are, homeless people are lazy, because this is the mindset where people think, well, why don't they just get a job? That guy holding the door at McDonald's, why doesn't he just go in and apply?
Yeah.
Like, I talk to people all the time who ask that question.
Right.
And then the other one is that they're dangerous. And this is what, like, we don't want shelters near our schools. We're scared. Like, oh, are they dangerous? Are they criminals?
Right.
And then the other one is that they're addicts. Oh, they must be addicted. That's why. So if we just get them drug treatment, that'll solve homelessness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's like, oh, but they're also mentally ill, and so we just need to treat them. And what I realize is that those stereotypes end up sort of functioning as like a anesthetist. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Like you become sort of like numbed.
Yeah.
Like to the reality of the challenges, and we don't even think about affordable housing as a legitimate cause of why someone might get priced out of their home.
Yeah.
And again, because then we see the people as sort of a victim, or like we're actually like, no, this is actually something that happened to someone.
Yeah.
This isn't something that they did to themselves.
Right.
And that shift, just from that mindset shift, will change how we see them. It will change how we engage with them, because if they are no longer sort of the cause of their own bad luck, then we have an obligation as society to do something about it.
Yeah.
But if they did this to themselves, then I can sort of take a pass.
Right,
I
because it's like, when you're not a victim, you're the actual cause of your
Yeah,
own plight.
yeah,
So, take on
yeah.
it's your responsibility.
Why
It's
should
not,
I help that person
yeah, yeah,
if he's out there because he just doesn't want to work?
you're right.
Why should I help that person
Yeah,
if he just wants to get high?
right.
Why should I help that person if he's just a criminal
Yeah.
who's,
But the
got
majority of them are not
but
those,
that's
they're
the
not it.
problem.
I
That's
know.
the problem.
One of the things I loved about your book was the stories that you
Mhm.
told. And they're enlightening in themselves. He had a fellow, and I
Mhm.
forget his name. I should have looked it up because the book was great. But there was a gentleman who had a job,
Yeah.
but he didn't have transportation to get to the job.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that impacted me the most was the challenges that people have to get the services that are available to them. But for one reason or another, it's like the red tape, they get stuck and they just can't, or they went to a shelter and they got ripped off. All right, they no longer have shoes,
Yeah.
or they don't have identification. Now they can't get the medical treatment that they need because they don't have any identification. And I'm like, wow. I mean, those are things I've never thought of ever.
The gravitational pull when you fall into homelessness is so strong because, like you just laid out very well, like the dynamics of getting help, it's not as simple as just asking for it.
Right.
And so everything you laid out is absolutely true. I met a guy last week, actually at 15, when he fell into homelessness when he was 15,
Mm,
was raised in a crack house, didn't
mm,
have much of a chance as a kid.
mm,
And then he ended up in the streets when he was 15. 10 years later, I meet him,
yeah.
and he had just like missed the cutoff for a bed by like 10 minutes.
Mm,
And so he's sitting there and he's like, what am I going to do? I'm so frustrated. And I ended up talking to him for a few minutes. And I'm like, well, how'd you get in the situation? He was in a shelter, but he was assaulted in the shelter.
wow.
So, and the guy who assaulted him wasn't kicked out, wasn't they didn't prosecute because it's just, it's two homeless guys complaining about
Right.
something. Like, there's again the stigmas that can
Right.
even lead
Yeah.
to our response to crime and our response to like the victimization of people in the street.
Yeah.
And so he ended up in this situation where he's like, well, if the cops aren't going to do anything, the shelter administration isn't going to do anything, I just need to leave. Like, it's just not safe for me here.
Right.
So he ended up in the street.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of people are like, well, the New York City, there's shelters all over the place. Why doesn't he go into a shelter? Well, he doesn't, because he got assaulted.
Right.
And
Who
he
wants to
chose
go there?
who wants to go there.
Yeah.
So it's
Wow.
just this dynamic where all those kinds of details that, again, I think we forget when we have this stereotype of sort of the self-perpetuating issue,
Mm,
which makes us then forget about all the hoops that people have to jump through. Like, for example, like you mentioned, ID.
yeah.
You can't just walk into the DMV and say, hi, I lost my
I lost my
wallet.
wallet. Yeah.
Can you give me an ID? The first guy you walk into is the guy behind the desk with a badge who
Right.
says you have your 16 points of identification.
Yeah,
You got
right.
your passport, you got
Yeah.
your mail,
Yeah.
you got your credit
Right.
card. So
I
you
I don't have any of it. I don't have any of it.
Out of
So what
luck.
do I do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see ya.
Yeah.
So, that was pretty amazing. Throughout the book. Let's pivot a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, City Relief.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about City Relief.
Mhm.
Maybe you give me a little bit of the history
Yeah.
and about that, because
Yeah.
this is a wonderful it's a wonderful ministry. I know a lot of people that have served.
Mhm.
So tell us a little bit about City
Yeah.
Relief.
So about 35 years ago, we celebrate our 35th anniversary as an organization
Wow.
last week. 35 years ago, a couple named Richard and Dixie Galloway were doing a Bible study in Dallas, Texas, and they were studying the scriptures in Isaiah. And Isaiah, they came across Isaiah 58, which is this beautiful scripture where the prophet writes that he goes, is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice, to untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free, to break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry
Mm.
and provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, clothe them and not turn away from your own flesh and blood. And as they were studying this scripture, they just got this vision of New York City.
Yeah.
And they got this vision of the sort of at the time there were all these tent encampments by Port Authority, and it was all in the news during
Mhm.
that season. And so they got this vision of bringing this organization where they could take a bus and they could go to the streets where people are struggling, and they can bring meals and
Wow.
supplies and medical care with the goal of then leveraging the relationship and that trust to connect people to resources and services that they need. Because there are lots of services and resources to help people who are in crisis. There are lots of people who are in crisis. The problem is the gap between the two.
Yeah.
And so Richard and Dixie, their vision really was to create this bridge between the peoples who are in need and the resources to meet those needs. So that's how the relief bus came to be. And that was what we ran for years and years in terms of just these buses that have been customized, turned into basically food trucks. And we drive into this different locations and we serve, we create these party environments where people in the street can be loved and cared for and welcomed. And we've been doing that for 35 years. And now what we're looking forward to is we're going, okay, what does it look like for City Relief 2.0? Like, we want to build on the vision that Richard and Dixie started. And we don't want to change anything. We don't want to change like who we are or what we do and how we do it, but we want to build on it. And so we want to take the history and
well, a lot of things change in 35 years.
Exactly. So it's a different dynamic. So we're shifting gears a little bit as an organization now, looking to the next 35 years and going, how can we serve? So like last year, we served over 50,000 people in the streets. We do
50,000.
We do 7 events every week. And now when I say events, it's like, that's the parties I'm talking about, the block parties where we set up and we invite people to us and we serve a hot meal and we connect people. And it's just a loving and beautiful experience. And you have to do it. If you haven't done it, you have to. It's amazing. And then the next piece is, okay, but how do we help people move beyond the event? And how do we help walk with people through the process? And so we've over the years been trying to really evaluate that and explore, what does it look like for us to walk with people, not just send them to the organization, but actually walk with them to the organization and actually go in with them and advocate for them along the way. So we've been building that out. And I mean, obviously with homelessness exploding, we know that this organization is strategically placed to respond to this crisis right now, and so that's what we're working towards.
I'm assuming that Dallas and LA and Chicago and Detroit all have similar type needs. I mean, maybe New York may be the biggest because we always look at ourselves that way. Maybe I don't know. Are there similar organizations that I'm sure you communicate with them if there are? What are you doing? How can I help you? How can you get ideas from others? I mean, but
so as far as the cities go, it is interesting because every city has sort of its own unique culture. And so New York City is interesting because it has what's called a right to shelter. This is in the charter of the city. It's actually in the rules of the city, is that they are obligated to provide emergency shelter to anyone who needs it. Now, this is a very complicated and convoluted thing, but it fits in the question because New York is the only city in America that has that built into their charter, like built into their laws. So in LA, for example, you have probably 80,000 or so people who are experiencing homelessness, but like 60,000 of them are in the street. They're actually in tents, encampments. Whereas in New York City,
well, it's so much nicer in LA.
The
weather. I mean,
the weather. I've been there. I gotta tell you, I'm biased. But I would take New York over LA every day and twice on Sunday. But no offense to my LA friends out there. But the reality of that means that the picture of homelessness in each city is very different. So like Seattle, Portland, Detroit, and then in different southern cities, depending on the politics and depending on the approach, there's so many different like opinions about how to deal with this issue. And so in New York, it is unique in that we have this right to shelter, but it's also unique in that the numbers are staggering. So we are talking about a situation. You mentioned 92,000. The best estimate that I've been able to come up with or see is that right now there's probably in the neighborhood of 150,000 homeless New Yorkers, or folks who are homeless in New York City. So it's getting pretty ridiculous.
I know that on your website, by the way, www.cityrelief.org. You got to check it out. There's lots and lots of resources there, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But on there, the mantra that I see, the 3 words: compassion, connection, community. Can you
Yes.
talk about that a
So
little?
that would be what we describe as sort of our continuum of care, or like our logic model of engagement. So it starts with compassion.
Mm,
So, for example, if you don't give, you know, if you don't give a crap about the people who are homeless, you're not going to enjoy serving with City Relief. You're
mm,
just not.
right.
You need compassion is a
Mm,
prerequisite.
mm,
You have to be empathetic and compassionate towards your neighbors.
mm,
And so the compassion starts by us just being generous. We just give
yeah,
out, again, the meals,
yeah,
the socks we give away,
right,
toiletries.
yeah.
We have a lot of friends who are sending us bars and
Mm-hmm,
snacks and
mm-hmm,
things that we're giving away to people in the street. And
yeah,
that's all just compassionate care.
yeah.
Now, what that does is that creates sort of an attractional vibe in the
Mm-hmm,
space. So that actually appeals to people,
mm-hmm,
and they just come because of that compassion. The key, though, is then leveraging compassion and turning it into connection.
mm,
So connection is the next step of saying homelessness, the average life expectancy of someone experiencing homelessness is 20 to 30 years less than the national average.
wow.
So you look at this and you go, this is a life and death issue. The people that are in the street, people who are experiencing this crisis, their years of their lives are being taken off.
Yeah,
So we can't just be compassionate in the sense of just here's food for today, good luck with your
mm,
life, but we have to connect people. We have to connect with them, and then we have to connect them to others.
mm,
The real revelation for this happened for me when my daughter was born, because I had this sort of epiphany where I was like, what would I do if something were to happen to my wife and my daughter ended up without parents
mm,
and ended up going through a tough spell,
mm,
like, and as a teenager, and ended up maybe self-medicating with drugs or getting into different, like, the party scene, or just
right.
coping
Yeah,
with
yeah,
trauma and
yeah,
with pain. She could end up homeless
yeah,
in New York City. There's a
yeah,
lot of runaways who get on buses all over the
yeah,
country and end
yeah,
up at Port Authority.
yeah.
So I got this picture of my daughter kind of walking up to our outreach in that sort of
Wow,
compassionate experience.
wow.
And I had this picture where I was like, what would I, as her father and as the CEO of this organization, what kind of experience would I want for her?
Yeah,
And it occurred to me that I don't want someone just to give her compassion. I also would be screaming from the heavens, like, please help her. Ask her
yeah,
what she needs.
yeah,
Ask her
yeah.
what services she's like. Let's not just wait for her to, like, magically be like, hey, I need help with X, Y, and Z. A lot of times when people are in crisis, they can't even tell which end is up. They don't know where to turn.
Well, yeah, because they're dealing with the crisis itself. They don't know, they don't know where help is even
Yeah.
available.
It's like a drowning person.
Yeah,
Like if
exactly.
someone's drowning, like, you can't, they tell you got to be careful. They might pull you down with it because
Yeah,
they're just they're desperate.
yeah,
And so that's where the connection comes in and says, like, no, we have to offer connection
yeah,
and be intentional about that. So
yeah.
compassion is the first part that leads to connection. The second part,
Mm-hmm,
and then the third part is community. Because really, as human beings, and especially we see this in scripture, we see as people of faith,
mm-hmm,
we know that the community of God, that the community of people, that we were, like it says in the Bible, that man was not created to be alone. It's
right.
not good for man to
Not
be
good.
alone.
No.
And so we understand that homelessness is intrinsically isolating.
Mm-hmm,
And so we want to create community for those folks so that
mm,
they are part of something.
yeah,
And they're not just receiving from us, but they're contributing to us as well.
yeah,
And so those three pillars are really our model for saying, this is how we're going to change lives.
mm,
We're going to offer compassion free of charge.
yeah,
No strings. And
yeah,
honestly, if someone comes to our outreach and they're
yeah,
a multimillionaire and they
yeah,
want a cup of soup and a
right,
piece of bread and a conversation and a
right,
pair of socks,
yeah,
they're welcome to it.
yeah,
There's no strings,
yeah,
no quid pro quo.
yeah,
And so we offer with compassion. That's the starting. Then we connect people to resources, we connect them to us. And then we bring them into community and we say, look, how can we help you just live the life that God created you to live?
right, right, right. It's just, I mean, it's amazing. It's a little undaunted. It's the magnitude of it sometimes is like wow. I mean, you know what, the story of
Yeah.
the starfish comes to mind.
Yeah.
I don't know if you don't know it. It's about this older man and his grandson walking along the beach, and there's all these starfish, and the grandfather is taking them and throwing one at a time back into the water, and the grandson is like, Pop, there's so many. How are we possibly going to make a difference? As he throws it in, he goes, well, I made a difference to that one. And in many ways, that's, that as they come, you're serving them, you're figuring out how to serve them, how to get them, socks and gloves and a cup of soup, and how to connect them to the services that they need, even just to give them information that there is, because like you say, many of them just don't really know. Pretty amazing. And I know, you're coming to this from a Christian posture, all right, because that's what we're called to do. As Christians, we're called to do that. And I guess part of our hope is that, they kind of see the light and, come to God. But if they don't, they don't.
Again, I love a quote by Billy Graham. I love this quote. He said once that it's God's job to judge, it's the Holy Spirit's job to convict, and it's our job to love.
Yeah.
So my job, I believe, is not to try to judge people, try to convict them of what their mistakes.
Right.
It's not my job.
That's not your
That's
job.
God's
No.
job.
Yeah.
It's my job to love.
Yeah.
It's my job to just be a safe place for folks and
Yeah.
recognize that, like, my brokenness is no better or worse than theirs.
Yeah.
And try to, and that's I think intrinsic. I actually wrote, I send out a weekly email. It's a sort of a shameless plug, but if anyone wants to sign up on our email list, they can do that through our website. But I send out a weekly email just to kind of educate people about homelessness, and occasionally I'll throw in some spiritual things. And so today, the email I sent out today talked about this idea of the least of these, which is a very common wording that Christians recognize because it comes from the scripture in Matthew 25. But I said that I've had people tell me that homeless folks are a lost cause. And what I did in this email was I said, I believe that a lost cause is the same exact, is a synonym for the least of these.
Yeah.
And that if you're a Christian, now again, I don't expect this of people who don't share my faith or my background. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
But for Christians, if you're gonna claim to follow a rabbi, a teacher who incarnate God, who said this is how you're supposed to live, then we don't have an option of looking away, of pretending like the least of these are a lost cause. Yeah. Because in God's eyes, there is no lost cause.
No, well, I mean, isn't that the reason that Christ came?
Exactly.
And we were all lost causes.
While we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Yeah.
And yet, for some reason, when it comes to homeless people, we want them to get their lives together
before we
accept them.
I know, and I'm, like I said, and forgive my ignorance, because, who knew? I mean, and the reality is this: I was supposed to know. All right. I really was supposed to know, but sometimes we choose to look away. Sometimes we choose to, I've supported your ministry for a while, but I have to be honest with you. I'm convicted that I've never been on a bus. I've never been on a bus.
There's still time.
I know. I'm going to go on a bus. I am. I'm going to go on a bus because these are people that are they're humanity. They're part of our lives. They're part of our neighbors. They're part of our community, and we can't. And if we neglect them, then we're going to be held accountable too. I mean, I really believe that. I believe that God is going to say, you know what, you were really stupid when it came to dealing with these people that I love, part of my creation, part of my children, and and you've ignored them. Can't do that. I can't do that. And, I don't think any of us can do that. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to put this particular podcast together, was because to help let people be informed and maybe to be challenged a little bit. Again, great book, Neighbors with No Doors. That's a great title, by the way. Neighbors with No Doors, because you know what? They are our neighbors. And, and I don't live here in New York City. I live out on Long Island. And, but in Long Island, there's homeless people out there too.
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. Again, you can't. Homelessness is no longer an urban problem. Homelessness is now, and it has to do. You mentioned earlier that if the affordability of housing, the housing costs in our country have skyrocketed over the last 30 years. Just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And wages have remained largely like kind of flat. Like they've gone up, but they've not kept up.
Right.
And so the average rent in July of 2023, I believe, in New York City, it might have even been in Manhattan, may not surprise some people, but it's $5,000 a month.
Wow.
It's average.
A month.
It's average. And then if you look,
that's $60,000 a year There are a lot of people that don't make $60,000.
And it
a year.
doesn't include, electricity,
No,
doesn't
no,
include
right.
good food,
Yeah.
cell phone. Like that's bare minimum.
Well, one of the stories that touched me greatly in your book was the woman who said, I had to choose between feeding my family and housing my family.
Mhm.
So she chose not to house them, but and I guess I would make that same choice. What a story.
Oh man, it's incredible. There was one person I know who she was on medication that was allowing for her to receive benefits from the
Yeah,
government
yeah.
to help subsidize her housing.
Listen to this. This is
So
amazing.
she's on this medication to subsidize her rent, which is allowing her to live in this apartment in Harlem with her daughter. The problem is the side effect of this medication is that it knocked her out. Just a side effect was, so when she took it, she was she conked out. She couldn't be a reliable mother
Right.
to her kid. So her kid was coming home from school and mama was asleep. She didn't have the option. She wasn't a good caregiver. And she felt so bad that she wasn't able to provide that for her daughter. But if she would stop the medication, if she would go to her doctor and say, let's find a plan to get me off of this medication, try something else, it's possible that that medication would have lost her housing.
Yeah.
Because her the subsidized rent was connected directly to her prescription
Yeah,
and to her medical issue.
and that's what I'm saying. These are some of the challenges that these people have that I learned through the book, that I've learned that, like, frankly, they're stupid. I mean, these are stupid reasons. It's like, what? I mean, so a person is taking their medication, getting subsidized. If they get off the medication, they lose their subsidy, so they're going to end up in the street. I'm like, well, does this make sense? Is this logical? Is this what we are here in the United States of America? This is the United States of America. I mean, come on, we got to figure out a way to do this. And and I'm not like a socialist kind of guy. I'm a capitalist. But you know what? There's a requirement that we have. And I think that we can definitely help people. So
Well, and can I just add real quick?
Yeah, sure.
I don't believe that homelessness. I think the politicization. Sorry, I can't speak English apparently. The fact that we've become that every issue has become political in our country has actually made it harder for us to have real, honest conversations about this stuff. And so I just want to add that, like, it doesn't matter what your political persuasion is, doesn't matter what, even your faith background, there's an element to this that is just humanity.
It transcends it all.
It's humanity, and it's saying, what kind of people do we want to be?
Yeah.
And I think there's a great quote, I'm going to botch it, but there's a great quote from someone who said that a society will be judged by how they care for their marginalized. Society will ultimately be judged how they care for the least of these. Again, using that term.
Least of these,
And so again, you don't have to be someone who's far left, or you don't have to be someone who's far right. You don't have to be socialist, capitalist, whatever, to see the human being who's in front of you and recognize that I am in a position to have compassion on this person.
Well, Jesus said it directly, right? He said, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was cold, you clothed me. When I needed shelter, you housed me. When I was in jail, you came and visited me. And then the disciples were like, when did we see you? When did we see you in those conditions? When you see the least of my brethren. All right. Whatever you've done to them, you've done to me. Can't be more direct than that. I mean, that's kind of what it's about.
Pretty clear.
It is pretty clear. It is pretty clear. So here's the challenge. I know, because I've been challenged. And the challenge is, what can we do to help? First thing I would do, again, go to the website, www.cityrelief, CITYRELIEF, all one word. Okay, it says right here, cityrelief.org, not .com, .org, because they're an organization. All right. If nothing else, get yourself educated. There's plenty of material there. Get a copy of his book, Neighbors with No Doors. It's available wherever books are sold. It's available wherever books are sold. This was on the bestseller list.
It was for Amazon. It was for Amazon for a stretch. It was #1.
That's cool.
On the poverty section.
That's for the poverty section. It's, hey, why not, right?
There's some great books out there.
They're also they're a wonderful organization. If you want to donate, I thought you take money, right? Yeah,
Yes.
they take money.
Yes.
So that's good, and in lots of ways, because I just went on,
Yep.
it was all good. So, but donate, but find out if you're in the area, there's plenty of ways to volunteer, whether it is volunteering goods, all right? I mean, there is stuff that they need. Find out, just don't send them like TVs.
That won't help.
That probably wouldn't help. Find out what they need, communicate with them, right? You got a phone number and all that stuff.
It's all on the website.
It's all on the website. Everything is there. You can communicate with them, find out what do you need. We need socks. Buy 100 pairs of socks. Send them some socks. Send them gloves. Send them hats. Send them shoes. Whatever. Sweaters. Send them. You can send them. Food bars and snacks but communicate first. Because otherwise, if everybody sends them socks and nobody sends them anything else, we're going to have a lot of naked people walking around with really nice socks on.
They'll put socks on there. I've seen people use socks as gloves.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, all that kind of good stuff. And also find out where you can volunteer. I guess you need a little help.
Yeah, we tell people all the time that we need volunteers as much as volunteers need us. Meaning, we want you to serve with us because we need help. I mean, we want you to be out there, but trust me when I tell you that the volunteering is not just for us, and it's not just for the people that we serve.
Yeah, you
will be impacted. Your life will be incrementally better. Again, I believe that God hardwired His creation to be, we are made in the image of God according to the scriptures. So there's that God DNA that serves, that gives. And so when we are not serving, when we are not giving, when we are not volunteering, we are actually depriving ourselves of that imago Dei. We are not actually living out the fullest version of what God created us to be.
Yeah.
And so I talk to people all the time. We're like, well, Josiah, I'm busy and I don't have much money to give. And yes, here's the thing. It doesn't matter. If you don't have much money to give a little. If you don't have a lot of time, give a little. You don't have to give a lot to make a difference.
That's right. Sometimes we don't know, I don't really know what to do. Well, here's the first thing. Josiah and his team, they know what to do. They've been doing this a long time, 35 years. They've been doing this a long time. They're dedicated, they're gifted. From where I sit, they're called. This is something that God has said, I need you to do this. Right? Because I guess there weren't enough people doing it. So you got your bell, he rang your bell, and here you are.
There you go.
So we can't forget our neighbors with no doors. It's just the truth. And we hope that I want to thank you for being on our podcast today. This will be going out, and if you're watching it, you need to share this with everyone that you know. All right. Because you never know who this is really going to speak to. All right. And I don't want anyone to miss an opportunity to be a blessing, to get blessed, to be a blessing, because you're going to get blessed through this as well. So if you found this podcast to have some valuable information, share this with as many people as you can. We really need to understand how to help people properly, how to be effective. This is a good organization that you can sow into. I know them for a long time. I know people that know them even longer. And those people are the ones that are like, hey, they're the real deal, and they are the real deal. So on just a general note, I air a podcast pretty much the first of every month, different subjects, all kind of about relationships. This is one that maybe not so much as much fun as some of the others, but it's probably more important than any of the others. Because our life is sometimes hard to navigate. And these are all parts of it. And if we can help people have compassion, have some empathy, be a help, be a greater part of our community, about humanity, I think that's all really, really important. So if you like this episode, maybe you want to find out some other episodes, you can go to my website, DennisLabriola.com, DennisLabriola, all one word, .com. You can get a copy of my book. My book is Seventh Inning Stretch, Reflections on the Game of Life. This is a lot more fun than the other one, right? But that one's more important. But this one here is fun. Again, available wherever books are sold. There's a commercial. But you can go, if you go onto my website, you can go to my YouTube channel. You can find this episode as well as others once they're released. What I would suggest is subscribe to the YouTube channel. This way you'll get notified. You'll get notified anytime a new one comes out. Our relationships are so important, but we so often kind of bring them down to me. And our world is a lot bigger than me, a lot bigger than just you. So, and God created us to be together, as Isaiah said. Man wasn't created to be alone. We're created to have relationships with people, whether it be our spouse, our kids, our parents, our neighbors, our friends, business associates, whatever it is. These relationships are part of the fabric of who we are. So we need to really do that as well. And if you're a Christian organization and you're looking for a speaker, I think either of us will come in and we'll, I'll speak, he'll speak. We're all together. All right, we're all together. So until next time, I want to leave you with this thought. Whether you recognize it or not, whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you even believe it or not, God is and has been with you. Think about it. God bless you. See you next time.
See ya.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Wow.